In Mexico, there is a stretch of road that no one can explain. Not because it's hard to find, but because the people who enter it cease to exist. They don't fade away gradually. They don't leave signs that something was wrong. They simply stop being in the world. The body disappears. The trail disappears. The explanation disappears. The explanation disappears. Since 1987, at least 11 pilgrims have vanished along the same 2.6-mile stretch of the Ruta de los Altos in the state of Jalisco. Walkers, religious travelers, drivers who pulled over to help someone on the shoulder, all adults, all healthy, all with a clear destination. None of them arrived. Authorities opened investigations that were eventually closed without answers. Families hired private investigators who also vanished one of them in 2003 on that same road while conducting his own inquiry. This isn't legend. This isn't folklore. This is a sequence of absences the Mexican government failed to explain, and at some point, stopped trying. What is happening on that road is the question, and it still has no answer. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and hit like right now, because what you're about to hear in the next few minutes isn't the kind of story you'll want to process alone. And before we go any further, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? The Ruta de los Altos exists on the map. You can trace the route, calculate the distance, zoom in on every curve from satellite view. It cuts through inland Jalisco like a forgotten line between dry hills and dense brush, connecting small towns that modern Mexico seems to have left behind. It's a functional road, used by truck drivers, by families visiting relatives, by pilgrims walking the route on religious holidays. An ordinary road in a country that has thousands of them. Except this road behaves in a way no other ever has. The people who disappear, they don't leave behind abandoned cars with doors wide open. They don't leave belongings scattered along the asphalt. They don't leave notes, blood, or anything that would point an investigation in any direction. What they leave is pure absence. A space where a human being once existed. And now there is absolutely nothing. No physical trace. No witnesses. No witnesses. No logic connecting the last time they were seen to the moment they stopped existing in anyone's record. The first documented case dates back to 1987. Hermenegildo Casas Fuentes, 54, left Tepatitlán de Morelos on foot one October morning, taking a route he had walked dozens of times before. His family waited. His neighbors waited. Police were notified 3 days later and searched the entire stretch. They didn't find Hermenegildo. They didn't find any trace of him. The case was recorded, filed, and forgotten in a folder that wouldn't be reopened for 20 years. When it was reopened, the investigator reviewing the files noticed something no one had before. Hermenegildo wasn't alone. There were other names, other dates, other disappearances along the same stretch, reported to different precincts by different families, without anyone ever connecting the dots, because no one had been looking for a connection. Each case appeared isolated, until they were all laid out on the same desk, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. 11 people, 36 years, a 2.6-mile stretch, and 0 answers. What happens on that road will be told here from beginning to end, with every detail authorities preferred to keep out of the headlines. And the further you go into this story, the more you'll understand why the silence surrounding it isn't neglect. It's something far more disturbing than that. Jalisco isn't a state Mexico forgets. It's one of the most populous, one of the most recognized, the birthplace of tequila and mariachi, home to cities featured in travel guides and cultural itineraries. But inland Jalisco is another country within the same state. It's where highways lose their fresh pavement, where gas stations are hours apart, where villages have fewer than 300 residents, and where the Mexican government shows up sporadically without infrastructure, without permanent presence, without the capacity to respond when something goes wrong. The Ruta de los Altos crosses this region with a geographic indifference only those who have driven it can understand. It isn't a dramatic highway. There are no cliffs hugging the asphalt, no hairpin turns demanding extreme focus. It's monotonous, flat in some areas, gently rolling in others, with vegetation shifting from dry scrub to dense growth without warning. On sunny days, it feels merely exhausting. On days of rain or fog, it disappears. Literally disappears. Visibility drops to less than 30 feet, and the world beyond the pavement ceases to exist as a visual reference. It's under those conditions that most of the disappearances were last recorded before the vanishing. Not all of them, but most. Fog-heavy days. Afternoons when the sky closed in too quickly. Moments when the road stopped being a line and became nothing more than the sensation of moving without knowing exactly where you were headed. That could be coincidence. Except it isn't just the weather that connects the cases. It's the geometry. The specific stretch where all 11 people were last seen measures exactly 2.6 miles. It begins at a gentle curve just past a rusted sign pointing toward a village called Rancho del Moral, a place that doesn't appear on any current digital map but does exist, with 43 residents, down a dirt road 6 miles off the highway. It ends at a concrete bridge over a dry creek, listed under an official name in old cartographic records but never called that by locals. They refer to it simply as the Gap. No further explanation, just the Gap. Between the rusted sign and the bridge, there are no visible houses from the road, no businesses, no bus stops. Dense vegetation lines both sides, along with a few dirt paths, with no apparent destination. And there is a silence that residents of Rancho del Moral describe in nearly identical terms across interviews conducted decades apart. It's a silence that weighs. No one from Rancho del Moral uses that stretch of the Ruta after 5 p.m. It isn't a spoken rule. It's a repeated behavior no one had to formally agree on. When asked about it, older residents answer evasively. Younger ones say they learned it that way, without knowing exactly who taught them. Carmela Zavala Rios is 72 and has lived in Rancho del Moral her entire life. In 2019, an independent journalist named Marco Tulio Espinoza Bravo secured an interview with her after 3 weeks of trying. She agreed to speak, but insisted the conversation take place inside her home, with the door closed. What she said was recorded and transcribed, and that transcript still circulates among researchers studying the case. Carmela said that when she was a child, her grandmother called that stretch La Boca, the mouth. She didn't know when the name originated. She said her grandmother had inherited it from someone even older, and she said the instruction that came with the name had never changed across generations. Don't stop. No matter what you see on the side of the road, no matter if it looks like someone needs help, don't stop. When Marco Tulio asked what happened to those who did stop, Carmela remained silent long enough for the silence itself to become an answer. Then she said only this: "You stop existing for your family. You stop existing for your family. You stop existing for your family. You stop existing for your family. For existing for your family. Not you vanish. Not you disappear. You stop existing for your family." The distinction is small on paper and brutal in practice, because it suggests the person may continue to exist somewhere, but in a way that makes return impossible. What that place might be, Carmela didn't say. The journalist didn't ask again. 3 months after that interview, Marco Tulio Espinoza Bravo returned to the Ruta de los Altos to film the stretch with a camera. He posted a photo that morning with the caption, "Entering the mouth." He never posted again. His car was found parked on the shoulder 200 yards before the rusted sign. The engine was cold. The doors were closed. The camera sat on the passenger seat with footage recorded up to that point. The footage after the sign did not exist. The recording simply stopped, as if the camera had been turned off. Yet the record button remained in the active position. Marco Tullio was not in the car, not in the surrounding vegetation, not anywhere the subsequent search managed to reach. He became the 12th name on a list the Mexican government prefers not to acknowledge as a list. Whatever exists within that 2.6-mile stretch has no official name, no formal report, no active investigation. Only a pattern that continues to repeat with a regularity that should be impossible to ignore. And that, for reasons the next chapter will begin to reveal, continues to be ignored with a consistency that doesn't feel accidental. Bureaucracy has a peculiar way of dealing with the unexplainable. It categorizes it until it becomes invisible. The disappearances along the Ruta de los Altos were not ignored because there were no records. They were ignored because each record was treated as an isolated event, an individual failure, a case with no connection to the others. The files exist, but the narrative that binds them together was deliberately fragmented. The first case, Hermenegildo Casas Fuentes in 1987, was archived as a voluntary disappearance. His family, desperate, insisted he had no reason to walk away. He had a wife, 3 children, and a small corn and bean farm that was his life. There were no debts, no conflicts, no history of depression or previous disappearances. The local police, operating with limited resources and overwhelmed by other cases, logged the complaint, conducted a superficial search, and concluded he had likely left on his own. His absence was interpreted as a choice, a convenient way to avoid investigating what didn't fit. In 1992, it was Elena Montoya Vargas, 32. She was returning from visiting her sister in Tepetitlan and had accepted a ride from a truck driver who dropped her near the entrance to the Ruta de los Altos, just a few miles from the fatal stretch. She intended to walk the remainder of the way to her village. She never arrived. The truck driver, Jorge Luis Ramos, was questioned. He confirmed where he had dropped her off, described her clothing, gave the time. He was released for lack of evidence. Elena's case was archived as disappearance without apparent cause. A slightly different label, but the same outcome. No deep investigation. Her family, like Hermenegildo's, was left with the void. The pattern was solidifying, but no one was looking at the full picture. Each municipal police department handled its own reports, without a centralized system to cross-reference rural disappearances. Poor infrastructure and mutual distrust between small jurisdictions ensured the dots would never be connected. It wasn't until 2007 that a young prosecutor, Ricardo Salazar Ortiz, newly assigned to the Jalisco Attorney General's office, stumbled across the files. He was reviewing old cases for a digitization project when he noticed the geographic repetition. 11 cases over 20 years, all on the same stretch of the Ruta de los Altos. Ricardo, still carrying the idealism of someone not yet worn down by the system, saw a pattern where others had seen coincidence. He attempted to reopen the cases, arguing there was a series of unexplained disappearances requiring joint investigation. His request was denied. Superiors cited lack of funding, lack of personnel, and more importantly, lack of concrete evidence linking the cases beyond location. People disappear on highways all the time, Salazar, they told him. There's nothing special here. But Ricardo didn't let it go. He began investigating on his own time. He visited families, reread original statements, mapped last known locations. It was he who uncovered the case of Marcos Peña Flores, a fabric salesman who vanished in 1998. Marcos had car trouble on the shoulder within the stretch. A passing truck driver saw him trying to fix a flat tire and stopped to offer help. Marcos declined, saying he had already called roadside assistance. The truck driver continued on. 2 hours later, the tow truck arrived and found Marcos's vehicle empty. The tire still flat, the driver's door unlocked. Marcos Peñaflores was never seen again. Ricardo realized the absence wasn't just physical. It was bureaucratic. The cases were buried under layers of paperwork, generic justifications, and political disinterest. The Mexican government wasn't actively covering up the disappearances, but it was creating the perfect conditions for them to remain unanswered. Diluted inside a system, unwilling to confront what defied explanation. The lack of a body became the perfect excuse for inaction. No body, no crime. No crime, no investigation, no answer. And without answers, the mystery deepened, solidified, and became part of the landscape. In 2009, Ricardo Salazar Ortiz was reassigned to a minor administrative department, far removed from field cases. His attempt to connect the dots was silenced not with threats, but with the cold efficiency of bureaucracy. He learned that sometimes the greatest obstacle to truth isn't an active enemy, but an indifferent system that values order over clarity. What Ricardo didn't know was that his amateur investigation, his maps and notes, would eventually fall into someone else's hands. Someone who didn't carry the naivete of a young prosecutor, but the stubborn resolve of someone who had already seen too much. And that person, unlike Ricardo, would not be so easy to sideline. Marco Tulio Espinosa Bravo's story did not begin with the Ruta de los Altos. It began with loss. His younger sister, Sofia, disappeared in 1995 in a separate case that was never solved. Watching his family collapse under the weight of an unexplained absence shaped him permanently. He became a private investigator not out of ambition, but out of a visceral need to find answers where the system failed. He understood what imposed emptiness felt like. In 2003, Marco Tulio was working a fraud case in Guadalajara when he overheard a rumor. A truck driver, sitting in a roadside bar, mentioned the highway that swallows people in Jalisco. No details, just a rough location. The phrase swallows people stuck with him. He had seen the system swallow cases. But people? That was different. He began digging, not as paid work, but as personal fixation. He used police contacts, bribed minor clerks, and by 2007, he had obtained copies of Ricardo Salazar Ortiz's notes files, sketched maps, a list of names. Marco Tulio saw the pattern Ricardo had tried to expose. He also saw how thoroughly the system had refused to acknowledge it. The difference between Ricardo and Marco Tulio was fundamental. Ricardo sought justice within the rules. Marco Tulio wanted truth, regardless of cost. He had no official position to lose, only a life to dedicate. And he did. Over the following years, the Ruta de los Altos became his life's work. He interviewed residents of nearby villages, long-haul truckers, families of the missing. He heard the same stories, the same evasions, the same silences. The legend of La Boca was more than folklore. It was a warning. He discovered that most disappearances occurred during heavy fog or strong rain, when visibility dropped to almost nothing, but not all. Some happened under clear skies and full sun. The one constant was the absence of direct witnesses to the moment of vanishing. People were seen before entering the stretch or somewhere within it, and then simply weren't there anymore. Marco Tulio developed a theory. Not aliens, not ghosts, collapse. He believed the stretch of road wasn't a place where people were taken. It was a place where they were erased. There was no kidnapper, no killer. There was a condition, a fault in reality, that manifested at that exact location. Lily. What the fact is Lily that manifested at that exact location? He spent months camping near the area, observing. He installed hidden trail cameras in trees, waiting to capture something, anything. The cameras recorded nothing unusual. Vehicles passing, vegetation moving in the wind. But he noticed something else. At certain moments, especially at dusk, ambient sound shifted. Birdsong diminished. The hum of insects ceased. A dense, oppressive silence settled over the stretch. It wasn't natural quiet. It felt absorbent, like sound itself was being swallowed. He called it the absorption moment. By 2019, Marco Tullio believed he was close to something. He had collected testimonies describing sudden disorientation, brief memory lapses, a sensation that time warped within that corridor. One family, the relatives of Ricardo Vargas Soto, a pilgrim who vanished in 2015, reported that Ricardo's phone GPS stopped functioning precisely at the beginning of the stretch and briefly reactivated near the end before shutting off completely. The phone was never recovered. Observation wasn't enough anymore. Marco Tullio wanted direct exposure. He planned to enter the stretch equipped with high-resolution cameras, a drone, and satellite tracking devices. He intended to document the absorption moment, and if possible, whatever came after. Before doing so, he sought out Carmela Zavala Rios in Rancho del Moral. He needed to understand the generational weight behind the name La Boca. When she told him, "You stop existing for your family," it confirmed what he already suspected. It wasn't about being taken. It was about being removed. The day he disappeared, Marco Tullio was confident. He posted a photo captioned, "Entering the mouth." He believed he was on the verge of exposing the secret of the Ruta de los Altos. His car was found roughly 200 yards before the rusted sign. The camera on the passenger seat stopped recording exactly where the stretch began. The drone remained in the trunk, untouched. Marco Tullio Espinoza Bravo was not kidnapped. He was not murdered. He simply ceased to be there. His body was never found. His belongings remained in the car. His research, notes, and maps were all intact. Everything was there, except him. His disappearance did not end the investigation. It confirmed it. The stretch of the Ruta de los Altos was not merely a place of vanishings. It functioned like a mechanism. And the next chapter will examine what authorities, in their silence, may already know about how that mechanism operates. The silence of Mexican authorities regarding the Ruta de los Altos is not accidental. It is policy. Not written policy, but a practice rooted in convenience and perhaps something darker. The absence of an official explanation is not due to ignorance, but to a refusal to confront what cannot be explained within the boundaries of law or science. After the disappearance of Marco Tullio Espinoza Bravo, limited public pressure began to build. Independent journalists and smaller news outlets questioned the government's inaction. The Jalisco Attorney General's office was forced to issue a statement. It was vague, referencing extensive search efforts and a lack of evidence, pointing to criminal activity. Marco Tullio's case was filed as disappearance without apparent cause, the same classification used for Elena Montoya Vargas decades earlier. But behind closed doors, the situation appeared different. An internal federal police report dated 2020, leaked anonymously to a small regional newspaper, revealed that the stretch of the Ruta de los Altos had been under discreet monitoring for years. The report cited electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained fluctuations in localized gravity detected by field equipment. According to the document, these anomalies were intermittent and geographically confined, concentrated within the 2.6-mile corridor. The report offered no explanation for the anomalies. It simply documented them. It concluded that due to the inconsistent and non-replicable nature of the phenomena. There was no basis for a formal criminal or scientific investigation. The recommendation was clear: maintain passive monitoring and avoid public disclosure that could generate panic or unfounded speculation. That recommendation is the key to the silence. The Mexican government does not want to acknowledge that within its territory, there may exist a location where physical laws appear unstable, where people cease to exist without rational explanation. Admitting that would open a cascade of unanswered questions, public fear, and an admission of impotence that no state willingly embraces. There is also the matter of reputation. Mexico already struggles with a complex global image regarding safety and disappearances, many tied to organized crime. Introducing the notion of unexplained vanishings due to unknown forces would further undermine public confidence and governmental credibility. Marco Tullio's case was particularly problematic. He was not a random traveler. He was actively investigating the disappearances. His vanishing at the exact same stretch, with recording equipment intact and no signs of struggle, was the clearest indication yet that something was profoundly wrong. And yet, instead of intensifying the investigation, authorities minimized it. The leaked report also referenced an incident in 2012 involving a team of geologists from the National Autonomous University of Mexico conducting seismic research in the region. One team member, Dr. Emilio Garza Herrera, a geophysicist, disappeared while calibrating a field sensor within the stretch. Colleagues reported seeing him less than 50 yards away. They turned briefly to adjust equipment. When they looked back, he was gone. His instruments were found on the ground, still active, registering anomalous vibration and magnetic field readings. The university initiated an internal inquiry, but was reportedly pressured to close it quickly. The case was classified as a field accident. With no further detail, the collected data was confiscated and has never resurfaced. These incidents suggest a deliberate strategy of omission. It is not that authorities are unaware something is happening. It is that they have chosen not to officially know. They have chosen not to publicly investigate. They have chosen to leave the mystery undisturbed, allowing the road to continue swallowing pilgrims, truck drivers, and even those who attempt to uncover its secret. The absence of an answer becomes, in itself, an answer. It is a tacit admission that whatever is occurring lies beyond human understanding and control, and that admission is more unsettling than any supernatural explanation, because it suggests the world is not as stable or comprehensible as we assume, and that there are places where reality itself may fracture, taking with it anyone who ventures too close. The next chapter will descend into the darkest theories and the speculation circulating among those who refuse to accept silence as closure, examining what the void truly means for those left behind. The void left behind by each person who vanishes along the Ruta de los Altos is not a gap. It isn't simply the absence of a person, but a violation of reality's structure for those forced to witness it. Families don't just feel the loss of someone they love, they feel the imposition of non-existence. And that is the most brutal part of this story. When Hermenegildo Casas Fuentes disappeared in 1987, his wife, Clara Fuentes de Casa, waited for him at the front door for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. She believed he would return, that he had gotten lost, that something had delayed him. When police informed her the case had been classified as a voluntary disappearance, she refused to accept it. She knew he would not abandon her. What she felt was not departure, but rupture, as if a line had been drawn and he had failed to cross it. She died 10 years later, still waiting, the front door left unlocked. Elena Montoya Vargas's family in 1992 endured something similar. Her sister, Sofia Montoya, clung to hope for years. She posted flyers across the state, visited hospitals, morgues, police stations. But with every closed door, every "we have nothing," Hope hardened into a colder realization. She had been removed. There was no place she could have gone. There was only a place where she no longer was. Sofia never again drove through that stretch of the Ruta de los Altos. She detoured every time, even if it added hours to her trip. The road was no longer a route. It was an opening into nothing. The theories about what happens along the Ruta de los Altos are as varied as they are desperate. Some suggest a geological fault generating a powerful magnetic anomaly capable of destabilizing organic matter. Others speak of a reality bubble that opens and closes, swallowing whatever is inside. There are those who believe the stretch marks a convergence of subterranean energies, a point where the Earth itself manifests violently and selectively. None of these explanations rest on solid scientific footing, yet each attempts to name a horror that defies logic. What cannot be denied is the impact. The absence does not feel like loss. It feels imposed. The vanishing is never gradual, never reflective. It is immediate, absolute, and without return. These people do not leave. Their existence is violated. Consider Ricardo Vargas Soto, the pilgrim who vanished in 2015. His deeply religious family believed he was undertaking a journey of faith. When he failed to return, they did not pray for his safe arrival. They prayed for explanation. Because Ricardo's absence was not merely the absence of a body, it was the absence of narrative. There was no story to tell, only an abrupt, senseless full stop. What the Ruta de los Altos does is more than take lives. It erases the possibility of closure. There is no traditional mourning, no burial, no ritual, only a black void dividing life into before and after, separated by an event that cannot be understood. In his final notes before his own disappearance, Marco Tulio Espinosa Bravo wrote a sentence that distills the essence of this horror. It's not that they disappear. It's that they were never there to begin with once the road touched them. The line, recovered from his journal, suggests a temporal inversion, a rewriting of existence more disturbing than death itself. The road is not a place of transit. It is a place of redefinition. It does not transport people elsewhere. It removes them from where they were. And that removal is final. In its silence, Mexico allows this violation to continue. The road remains open. Cars still pass. Pilgrims still walk. And somewhere within that 2.6-mile stretch, the unexplainable continues to operate, swallowing lives and leaving behind only the echo of a silence that should never have existed. There is no satisfying conclusion here. No revelation that brings peace. There is only the road, the corridor, and the certainty that some mysteries are not waiting to be solved. They are waiting to happen again. If you've made it this far, it's because truth, no matter how brutal, pulls you in. The story of the Ruta de los Altos is a reminder that not everything in this world comes with an explanation, and some mysteries run so deep they challenge human comprehension itself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and hit like so you don't miss the next investigations. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? Your perspective matters as we continue uncovering these dark secrets.